Hello and welcome back to Transforming Relationships with Emotional Intelligence. Today I'm honored to introduce a truly remarkable guest whose journey and work embody the healing power of empathy and connection. Kim Downey is the founder of Stand Up for Doctors, a mission-driven movement born from her experience as a physical therapist and three-time cancer survivor. That personal journey fuels her fierce advocacy for physician well-being and clinician mental health. She serves as an ambassador for Medicine Forward and the Dr. Lorna Brain Heroes Foundation, and is also active with the Clinician Burnout Foundation. Through these roles, Kim amplifies the voices of doctors, nurses, and patients, highlighting systemic challenges like burnout, moral injury, and loss of autonomy, and working tirelessly to change the conversation around them. Her work is rooted in a simple belief. When we support the humanity of our caregivers, patients receive better care. Absolutely. To this end, Kim co-authored the book White Coats, Courageous Hearts, true stories of doctors reclaiming their humanity in a system that challenges it. The book shines a light on a quiet rebellion within medicine where physicians are reclaiming agency and connection, a theme that deeply resonates with our podcast's commitment to emotional intelligence and meaningful relationships. Kim's mission is to foster connection and advocacy for healthier doctors and stronger healthcare system, and she embodies the resilience and compassion needed to lead that charge. Her story reminds us that healing is not only about physical medicine, but also about reclaiming our shared humanity. Kim, welcome to Transforming Relationship with Emotional Intelligence. I am so grateful to have you here and excited to dive into your journey and your vision for a more compassionate healthcare world. Thank you for joining me today, Kim.
Thank you, Owen. I'm honored to be here, and I really appreciated that beautiful introduction.
Thank you. Kim, why don't we start by you letting our viewers and listeners know what your day-to-day involvement in supporting doctors look like?
Sure. So, to share in the most briefest way my journey, I'm a pediatric physical therapist, and I was working at a local elementary school at the time that I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and I had surgery and a complication, and then two more cancers after that. And then what I thought was finally going to be a routine visit after 2 years of constant medical issues and appointments, I discovered that one of my amazing doctors had taken his own life, and that literally shattered me to the core. I was devastated, and I felt a calling to support doctors. And that's what brought me into this space.
Wow, that's really amazing. That's really amazing. So, how are you going about that in terms of what you do in your everyday activities?
Well, I ended up with a physician coach, Dr. Michael Hirsch. His blog had showed up on my Facebook feed in the spring of 2022, and I found out my doctor died in the fall of 2022. And we had a conversation, and then he started coaching me, and he helped me process and accept a lot of things. And during that time, he connected me on LinkedIn. I wanted to find a way to support my own local doctors, and I thought if I talked to other doctors, that they could help me find a way to help my own doctors. So that was the spring of 2023.
Yeah.
And as I started talking to doctors, I started finding ways to support them. It seemed like when I talked to a doctor, I'd know who they'd want to be connected with. So I'd say, "Oh, you should talk to so and so." And we formed this like LinkedIn family.
Right.
And then in the fall of 2023, I was encouraged to start a YouTube channel, and I decided to call it Stand Up for Doctors. So when I'm interviewing doctors, I'm telling them to stand up and raise their voice. And when I'm interviewing others that intersect with healthcare, I'm sharing that we need to stand up for doctors. So that's one thing that I do to amplify physician voices. I say so many times when a doctor shares their story, another doctor feels less alone. So that's why doctors like to hear these stories. And then as patients listen, they'll understand more of the interior struggles that physicians are facing, what it's really like to be a doctor today. And they'll have more empathy and compassion for a physician. So that work helps doctors and patients. And then I started a Substack newsletter, really because I was sending my own doctors monthly updates on the things that I was trying to do to help them. And that turned into the newsletter.
Wow.
And then, as you mentioned, we reached out to the first 20 doctors who were guests on my YouTube channel, and 15 wrote chapters in our book, White Coats, Courageous Hearts. And the other ones wrote a beautiful endorsements in the beginning of the book. And those are some of the things that I'm doing. And as you mentioned, I'm an ambassador for several organizations involved in this work.
Awesome. Awesome. Amazing things you're doing, Kim.
Thank
Yes,
you.
you mentioned your book, White Coats, Courageous Hearts. And from what I found out, it's a collection of 15 raw true stories highlighting the emotional journeys of doctors facing trauma, addiction, bullying, moral injury, and even suicide. What inspired you to curate this anthology, and how did you choose which voices to amplify?
So my journey, because I only told you the bare minimum, the journey of 2 years of all of my medical challenges and everything, and culminating with the loss of my doctor, it is quite a story.
Yeah.
So many people have been telling me, you should write a book, you should write a book. Now, I did have some not very good experiences also at the hands of doctors, though I know that doctors are suffering, and I didn't feel that I could just write about the good without the bad, but I also didn't want to disparage any physicians or, I didn't feel like I could write it without them knowing, it was them if I shared the whole story. So then I'm like, well, I just can't tell my story. But then Dr. Michael Hirsch, my physician coach, had shared with me, well, what I do is amplify physician voices, and that basically I could write an anthology or compile an anthology of sharing physician voices. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I don't believe I would have had the bandwidth or the time to do it on my own. In January, Emmy Vita Estachio, she's a health psychologist and she helps people publish their books. And she had started to help Medicine Forward, that I'm involved with their newsletter, and it was doing very well. So I reached out to thank her, and we had a conversation. And when she learned more about me, she reiterated that she really feels that I should write a book, and she offered to help. So it was her suggestion that this is going to be a series. So if you could see, this is book
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's many more
exactly.
stories to tell,
Yes, yes, I
and
noticed that it was book
and
one.
we've actually just this week reached out to the next group of doctors. So what we're doing is we reached out to the first doctors, who were on the YouTube channel, and we're going to keep going. I have now, I've had over like 120 something episodes, so we'll keep going.
Awesome. So, how are doctors participating in this? Are they really involved? Doctors, are they engaged?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so we and Emmy did a beautiful job. So what she did is we reached out, to those doctors, and the ones that said yes, she gave them ideas. It was based on our YouTube channel episode, or they could write about something else, and she guided them through the whole process. And the doctors found it to be such a positive experience. I believed at least a couple have since reached out to her about potentially in the future writing their own book.
Right. Which could be more fulfilling for many of them actually to engage in such a
Mm-hmm.
project. Awesome. Yeah, Kim, self-compassion is a recurring message in the book. Doctors are encouraged to see seeking help as a strength, not a weakness. Could you share an example from the stories where self-compassion helped a physician overcome a crisis, and how can clinicians practice this in their daily work with all that they have to do?
Sure. Well, I actually have a few examples that I could share with you. And one of the chapters by Dr. Joe Sherm is actually titled Coming Home to Ourselves, A Physician's Guide to Self-Compassion and
Okay.
Sustainable Care. And Joe Sherman speaks much to self-compassion. And in this book, he just shares one brief story that he shares
Mhm.
is, he was rushing to finish up at a family shelter clinic. He wanted to get home to dinner. And then a really complicated case came in the end of the day.
Right.
So he was quite frustrated and upset, and he knew he wasn't going to get home to dinner on time. But what he did was he took a deep breath and he put his hand on his heart. So he says, he's usually wearing a stethoscope. So when he did that, people would think he's just holding his stethoscope. But in his own mind, he said to himself, I'm feeling frustrated and angry. Everyone feels this way sometimes. Let me take some deep breaths and take care of myself as I do the best I can to listen to my patient. May I be as present as possible to this family who needs me right now. So
Absolutely.
that was a way in that moment he
Right.
had learned to show self compassion to himself.
Right.
And a couple other instances where doctors have needed to do that is Dr. Todd Otten writes the first physician chapter in our book, and he had written his own book, Ripple of Change,
Mhm.
with his patient Joshua Judy.
Right.
And he had prescribed a medication that I believe he had taken himself that had very bad side effects for his patient Joshua Judy. So their book is about, changing healthcare, but also their story and journey of healing together as a patient and physician as one time where doctors really need to offer themselves self-compassion is when they experience a complication. And just one more example that I'll share is another chapter in our book is written by Dr. David Alfrey, and he had also written his own book called Saving Grace. He's an anesthesiologist.
Mhm.
What patients teach their doctors about life, death, and the balance in between. And he shares a powerful story about when he was called out in the middle of the night for a trauma case. And he shares, I found myself thinking maybe it will all be dead, meaning it was related to like a dead bowel,
Yeah.
and not just thinking it, but kind of wishing it. And he says, looking back, I want to believe that my only reason for thinking that way was a matter of patient benefit. If he had an inoperable dead bowel, would simply close him up and his suffering would be over. But I also mixed in there was my thinking, God, I can't remember when I've been this tired. I'm so effing tired. My head is spinning. I just want to get back to bed and somehow get through this night and start over tomorrow. So
Right.
I felt it was very powerful that he was willing to share that in a book and that he needed to offer himself self compassion, realizing when you're that, not every person ever feels that tired. Something it's unique to doctors, first responders, people that do shift work. We're not all called to work in the middle of the night and expected to be our best.
Yeah.
So that's yet one other time where doctors really need to offer themselves some self-compassion.
Yeah. Amazing. Just talking about self-compassion, it brings to light the type of work we do in terms of supporting doctors, teaching them emotional intelligence, self-awareness, recognizing their emotions, naming them, accepting them, and then seeking the right intervention and yeah, having the right words to express their emotion, what we call emotional literacy or understanding how their emotions play out in certain situations. So I think that's very, very handy in these situations, which is exactly why we focus on supporting doctors in the work we do. The example you gave about the doctor that gave a prescription to the patient and then he had a reaction, I think that's remarkable because the experience we have here is that a lot of times when such a thing happens, I have an instance of one of the doctors I work with, and she made a prescription to somebody, and actually she went over and beyond. This person came when she has already closed, and because of the way she was complaining, she had to do something and told her to also read the handout from for the medication before taking it. But she didn't do all of that, and then she took it, and it helped her. But then she later reacted to it, and she was sued. and she didn't like that experience. So this instance you gave here where patient had the understanding that maybe the doctor did the best he could, because some of these things you may never, there's nothing else the doctor could have done. And sometimes they even go be above and beyond to support the patients, and something like this happens, and then you are sued for it, and you get. I think that was very traumatic for this my client, and she was even contemplating, quitting medicine entirely because of that experience. It still traumatizes her today each time she thinks of it. So I think that instance where the doctor and the patient came together to look at this as working together as a team to see that this person was helping and this happened, and maybe it was unavoidable in this situation.
Right. Well, I actually want to record an episode for my YouTube channel, and I've discussed it with Dr. Michael Hirsch as my physician coach. He's a gastroenterologist who does obviously many procedures, and I want to call it complications. It's complicated. And I want us to speak to it from the perspective of the doctor and patient so doctors and patients can really understand, what it feels like as the doctor and what it feels like as the patient, and how we can have real and honest productions about that. Because doctors, when as you said, most of the time they're doing their very best,
Absolutely.
and it's an art, science, right? Medicine, and if you do procedures, surgeries, it would be impossible by the end of your career never to experience a complication.
Yeah.
But doctors are also told, they're not allowed to talk about it,
Yeah.
right? So not only experiencing the complication because they're trying to do something good, and if there's a negative consequence, they feel so bad, so they feel a lot of shame, and then if they also can't even talk about it, that makes it worse. And then from a patient perspective, though, I know sometimes doctors feel like patients are ambulance chasers. I don't know if you have that term over there,
Yeah.
which means that they're just going for the money.
Yeah.
And but many times that's not the case of the patient either, and there really is a real person on the other side of that complication that sometimes experiences effects every day for the rest of their life, or sometimes even dies. And some of it, I think doctors um, would be less likely to be sued if they in the healthcare systems were educated in a very good way of how to communicate after a complication occurs. And one really good example that I've shared a couple times before is this book by Dr. Jean Paul Brutus. It's
Mm-hmm.
called Secrets and Lies from the Operating Room.
Mm-hmm.
And it says everything you wanted to know about the world of surgeons. So I found the whole book interesting. Like he'll ask questions and then answer the questions. But one of the questions says, surgeons are humans, they make mistakes, but what do surgeons say when they mess up?
Okay.
And he offers this beautiful, he says, here's a great way to do it. And he says, I'm very sorry this has happened to you. This is not the outcome that any of us wanted for you. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that you've had to go through this. I know that you're feeling very upset, frustrated, and angry, and I would be feeling the same way. All I can do is say, I'm sorry that you're in this situation, and we're going to do everything we can to understand the events leading up to this so that we can avoid it happening again. In the meantime, I want you to know that I'm here for you if there's anything I can do.
Yeah.
And I think that would make a world of difference to pay because they're not saying they did something wrong. They're apologizing because this did happen. They're saying, I'm sorry this happened to you. We're going to try to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I'm going to be with you. And that can mean the world to a patient. And I do think that having that using language along those lines could
Yeah.
be very helpful.
Absolutely. Just Kim, just talking about that, I've also observed that certain times when things go wrong, does not necessarily mean that the doctor has done anything wrong,
Right.
right? Like somebody reacting to medication that was prescribed to them, which helped
Right.
them actually. But the fact was that they reacted to it, and there's no
Right.
way the doctor would have known that. And this
Right.
happens to one out of maybe a million. And now there's
Right.
still no way the doctor would have known that you are this one person out of a million that this will happen to. So
Right.
really, when things like this happen, it is not always an error on the part of the surgeon or the doctor. Sometimes it could just be that it happened. There's nothing else they could have done to avoid such a situation. And I think educating patients and also having a system that supports the doctors, because really, when things like this happen, the doctor is left with the solicitors and the legal team of the patients to be battling, going in and out of court. And they feel, I don't think there's enough protection in some places for doctors when things like this happen.
I think you're exactly right. And all the things you just said, that's so important for everyone to be aware of. And from the part of the patient on one side, they also, you have to make sure that they have true informed consent.
Yeah.
And in some cases, that's not always given or fully given. Or there's actually another book. I won't leave my desk here to pull it out, but it's called something like "There's a Snake on My Head," and
Yeah.
it was written by a nurse, and she speaks to the fact. I'll just give you one example from a patient perspective. Is say they had a surgery and you're trying to give them their post-op instructions that are very important to follow. What if they're worried about picking their child up to daycare or how they're going to afford the medication? Like they have so many thoughts in their own head, they aren't really listening, and that's the snake on their head.
Yeah.
Or a doctor, say he's performing his first surgery after experiencing a complication. Imagine the anxiety that the doctor might have, and there's a snake on his head. So I feel like when doctors are explaining, giving true informed consent, they should make sure that the patient understands or have them repeat back some of the very important things to make
Mm.
sure, like you
Very
can't say a
important.
few things in one sentence one time and expect that they really took that in.
Right.
And but also from your other point about supporting doctors, that's 100% true because after this happens, it's very difficult for doctors and they do need to feel support and sometimes they don't get it
Yeah.
from their organization. And I also can totally identify with it because as a physical therapist, I had to carry malpractice insurance as well.
Yeah.
And luckily in my whole career, I never, nothing ever came up and I was never even close to being sued. But there are times you're working with patients at the edge of their competence. And sometimes you're trying challenging things to help them get back home.
Right.
And sometimes you don't have the support you need. Like, say it's a challenging patient, either cognitively or they're twice your size, and you want to try something, but you might not have someone to spot you. And
Mhm.
then you're always thinking, well, do I not do it? Because your first job is to keep your patient safe and yourself safe. Or if they don't know how to do this thing, then they can't get home, and then so it's always a balance too, where I think physical therapists, doctors, people who care for patients, you do put patient safety first. And as you said, you can be doing everything right, and sometimes things are going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think in some way they are constrained in few ways. For instance, even the explanation of consent. In some places, they have 10 to 15 minutes to
Right,
see one patient and then move on to another patient that is waiting. All right,
right,
so that's the way they maybe their surgery runs. So,
right.
or what is expected of them. Within that 15 minutes, they can't read the whole of what is written and give that level of details.
Right. One thing, Dr. Adam Rosen is an orthopedic surgeon on the West Coast, and during the pandemic, he started creating educational videos
Right.
for his patients and the med students because they were really restricted in what they were able to do and learn, especially in the early days of the pandemic and especially before a vaccine came out. So I love that he does that. So if he shares those videos, those educational videos, it's coming from a trusted source about things to do, things to avoid, complications that could occur. So I feel like we could use like that could be a good use of PAs or nurse
Yeah.
practitioners
Yeah.
or people if they make videos then if other doctors do surgeries that are similar enough, if they could share those, because his, I think, are available to anyone on YouTube, that it's
Absolutely.
something that they could offer their own patients as well. So
Mhm.
those are a few other ideas, because to your point, yes, in that limited time, it's very difficult to discuss all the things that need to be discussed. Speaking to stories, our last chapter is by Dr. Stephen Lewellis, and we actually titled it "Sometimes a Person Needs a Story More Than Food: The Power of Storytelling." So I love it that that's the last chapter in this book, because he speaks to the power of storytelling, and it opens the door that there's many more physician stories to tell, and which leads to that we'll have other volumes of our book.
Mhm.
What I found is through LinkedIn, through this LinkedIn community, that when I've talked to doctors again, I sometimes I've given doctor shout outs. Like, we'll have a conversation, and then I would get and I'd tell people a little about that doctor, and then the other doctors in my network that are active, that we've had this little community, then they would send them a connection request. And some of them have even become real friends, and they've had conversations driving home.
Yeah.
And then I would love to share, because I haven't formally announced it yet, but I'm planning a physician retreat for the fall of 2026 at the Edith Macy Conference Center in Briarcliff Manor, New York.
All right.
And we're hoping that's going to be an opportunity
Mhm.
for these doctors that largely have only known each other on LinkedIn
Yeah.
to gather in person and spend a weekend together.
All right.
And it's going to be a weekend to connect, empower, recharge, and celebrate. And
All
there's
right.
a lot of interest in that, to spend that time really connecting, really sharing stories. And it makes all the difference, providing doctors with opportunities where they can feel safe to talk with their colleagues.
Thanks. Absolutely. That would be a great event. And I believe most doctors will definitely benefit immensely from it. Awesome.
And you're welcome to come.
Thank
I'll
you.
keep you posted.
Please keep me posted, definitely.